That being said, ladies and gentlemen, now from the innovators, it's now time to set the stage for highly distinguished leaders from the armed forces joining us this evening. This is where we bring your focus to the defense frontier and how disruption in defense technology is shaping global security. So let's get to understand all that and more, because as we take a look at technology per se, it's also important that this session gets to examine how technology integrates into battlefield strategy. We've been hearing since morning as well about the AI-enabled warfares, drone swarms as well as cyber frontlines, how all of these are redefining the military doctrine. So then, that being said, what's the focus coming up next? Let's get that from the leaders themselves. In fact, this particular session will be spearheaded and moderated by Ambassador Sujan R. Chenoy, Director General, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. So we will be joined by all our leaders, and Ambassador Sujan will be responsible in extracting all the relevant and all the dynamic perspectives from all of our panelists. While that happens, meanwhile, I'd like to urge all of you to keep those conversations coming using the hashtag GBS 2026. Keep your thoughts coming across the social media as well. We'll quickly set the stage and we'll quickly deep dive into our next session. Let me also tell you that this particular session will also focus on how disruption shapes deterrence, also gets to consider the geopolitical implications of defense innovation, because security today is technological, so let's get to understand all that and more. My team is set, and I believe the stage is also set. So first up, let me please invite on stage our session moderator. We have with us Ambassador Sujan R. Chenoy, Director General, Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. So thank you so much for joining us. And first up, I'd like to also express my gratitude to all of you for waiting patiently with us. So thank you so much for that. But with that, let's go ahead and invite your speakers and our panelists. Let's do that first up by inviting Dr. Sudhir Mishra, former Director General, BrahMos, DRDO. We're joined by Air Marshal Anil Chopra, retired, former Director General, Center for Air Power Studies. Lieutenant General Dr. Anil Kapoor, retired, former Director General, Information Systems and EME. Ankit Mehta, CEO of IdeaForge Technology, and Group Captain G. Aditya Kiran, Directing Staff, Defense Services Staff College, DSSC. You know, when you have dynamic leaders here on the stage, that warrants for a dynamic round of applause. Come on, let's get the applause coming. Let's keep the energy coming. And with that, sir, over to you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for that warm and generous introduction. And I welcome you all to this wonderful session that we'll have on the defense frontier, how disruption in technology is shaping global security. We've been given 30 minutes, so it's going to be a very racy and very interesting session. But before I pose my questions to the eminent panelists, I will obviously say a few words. Friends, disruption in defense technology is also known as revolution in military affairs. And RMA, as it's known by its acronym, is a buzzword that militaries worldwide are familiar with. Each generation of the military adopts and encounters new technologies that intersect with changing doctrines, strategies, and tactics to bring about irreversible, irrevocable changes in the character of warfare. What makes the current era different is the pace at which new technologies are emerging and intersecting with others across multiple domains. In the past, the RMA simply made a gun a better gun, or a tank a better tank, or a fighter aircraft a better fighter aircraft. But they did not change the very essence of warfare. Technological changes, when accompanied by doctrinal shifts and organizational changes, and now accompanied by rapid changes in artificial intelligence, these are the ones that have the greatest impact on defense security and global security in general. Tanks were around in World War I, but became a game changer only when fielded with the fast, concentrated blitzkrieg strategy in World War II. Aircraft carriers came into their own when doctrinal shifts advocated sea control through air power rather than the big guns, mounted on very large battleships. Nuclear weapons have also been seen as preventing war through the doctrine of deterrence and mutually assured destruction, that is, MAD. A doctrinal shift towards precision strikes, remote warfare, data-driven operations, along with network-centric command structures, these have all come together to bring drones and unmanned vehicles center stage today. Ladies and gentlemen, artificial intelligence, which is very important. As you know, India is going to host the AI Impact Summit very shortly. It is AI, space, and cyber realms that are fusing today with sensors, with UAVs and beyond visual range weapons on the modern battlefield. These drastically reduce sensor to shooter kill chains. Advances in military technologies in the next 10 to 15 years will be even more dramatic. Unless regulated by a common definition of ethics and morality, lethal autonomous weapon systems, that is laws, will be widely used to find, identify, track, and target enemy forces or equipment, perhaps without any human intervention in the decision-making chain. This will obviously shorten what is known as the observe, orient, decide, and act, that is the OODA loop, to operate at speeds that defy imagination. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no denying that countries that invest in futuristic technologies through R&D have better supply chains and an upper hand on the battlefield. Most disruptive technologies are dual use. They have the power to bridge asymmetries in absolute power. The internet, commercial drones, and satellite imagery, together with GPS and AI, are examples of technologies that will shape global security. Yet another fascinating lesson from recent conflicts is the convergence of big tech, disruptive technology, and private individuals and their impact on global security. Elon Musk's Starlink, for instance, and quasi-strategic roles played by Microsoft and Amazon in cybersecurity, cloud computing, satellite infrastructure, and AI, these will all have far-reaching consequences on global security. So it goes without saying that India will have to invest much more in defense technologies, particularly AI, particularly disruptive technologies of the future. And we will also need a much higher degree of civil-military fusion. Now, we have a wonderful panel here, and I will straight away go to our first panelist, Dr. Sudhir Mishra, former Director General of BrahMos. As you know, it's a very successful venture that has credited itself very well in all kinds of conflict situations that India has faced. So my question to you is, India is shifting from a major defense importer, as in the trend has begun, to developing its own systems like Tejas, BrahMos, missiles, and drones. What structural, technological, and industrial changes have made this possible or will make it possible? And what should India focus on next to become a top global exporter of advanced defense technologies? I want your views with regard to the success of the BrahMos program.
Thank you, sir.
4 minutes, please.
Thank you. To become a very powerful nation in the defense technology, we need to have design and manufacturing capability, very clear government policies, very top-class marketing team, and of course, the support of government at all the levels. The first thing is, when it comes to the design and manufacturing capability, India is anyway home to one of the biggest cluster of GCCs, and we have a huge, large manufacturing capability in the country. And in fact, when I discuss with the people, they say that we are still operating in the 1 or 2 shifts. We can work 24 hours and manufacture. The second thing, when it comes to the development of the state-of-the-art weapons, if we take Tejas, Tejas has been in the making for the past 30 years due to various reasons. Now, we have already started the design and development of MCA. MCA, some time back, as you know that for Tejas we have been using the American G404, G414 engine for various versions, but for MCA, the chief of DRDO has stated that if given about 1.2 or 1.5 billion dollars, we can develop our own engines in the time frame of 3 to 5 years. The days of Kaveris are over. For Kaveri, we invested hardly 2,000 crore rupees spread over about 20 years. So here is an opportunity. The third thing, when it comes to the BrahMos, as you know, the BrahMos is a joint venture between India and Russia, and we have completely manufacturing the missile in our country. And to export it, to export any weapon, we have developed the manufacturing capability in our country. Now, when it comes to substitution of imported system with our own system, with our own indigenous systems, the government has already declared that Make in India or Atmanirbhar policy, and providing full support in all the ways when it comes to the money or any other resources. So the question was about the export. The export, what I feel when I joined BrahMos, I made it a kind of objective that in my tenure I'll ensure that I develop air version and make the export of BrahMos. It took us almost 7 years.
And we did a great job with selling, a few batteries to the Philippines.
Yes, 7 years it took. Very hard work, a sincere 1-point agenda to ensure that we are able to break even. Now, export of the weapon is not a commercial activity. It is finding a strategic depth, developing the strategic interest in that country. We have to look from that point of view. And we did it in Philippines, hopefully, and we did it in Armenia also. We are going to replicate in few more countries. I don't want to name them. It will create business problems. So it is very much possible. And the government has to have certain policy changes. Although they are in the making, but we need to have a export promotion body, a separate body, which will give a very fast clearance. The next thing is the Indian Armed Forces have to induct few of the systems of our private companies, because when it comes to the export, the imported country always asks, is it inducted into the armed forces or not? So I feel that these are the basic requirements. And for BrahMos, I would like to tell one thing, that Shahbaz Sharif is our brand ambassador of BrahMos. The reason is we always maintain 9 targets. And he said that not 9, you hit 11 targets. So it happens very rarely that your enemy says that you hit me more.
Thank you. I think there will be a trade-off between what we can sell to others and how much we might need for our own use, potential use in the future. But I'm glad you mentioned aircraft engine. Our next panelist, of course, is none other than Air Marshal Anil Chopra, former Director General of CAPS. And my question to you is, as global power shifts towards core technologies, how can India innovate domestically while partnering internationally without losing strategic autonomy? And keep in mind the Rafale deal, keep in mind the negotiations with Safran to develop a 120 kilonewton fighter aircraft engine that will power the 5th generation AMCA. So how do we do all this without losing strategic autonomy? And a penny for your thoughts on having a homegrown fighter aircraft engine for not only AMCA but also Tejas Mark II. The Honorable Prime Minister himself touched upon this in his speech on the 15th of August from the ramparts of the Red Fort. So over to you.
Yeah, so I'll start first by making a general point about disruptive technologies, and I must say that military history, replete with the disruptive technologies, whether it was gunpowder, whether it was heavier than air flight that took place in 1903, whether it's the bomber, whether it's the, nuclear weapon, whether it was cruise missiles, precision, long range, any amount. And now the latest with AI coming in, drones, autonomy is continuing. But I want to make it clear that notwithstanding this autonomy, then quantum computing, high decision making, which are all supporting the military in terms of decision making, allowing greater autonomy to the weapon, to the platform, man is still on the loop, is in the loop, on the loop, not out of the loop. And that is why, if you see the 5th and 6th generation aeroplanes being built around the world and the 7th generation aircraft which are on the drawing boards, all have got the man in it. And what will happen will be man-unmanned teaming. So that is where the future is. The unmanned system will do all the roles possible, but they will have a man in the loop, or certainly on the loop, and who will be monitoring what's going on. That's the statement number one. Now, as far as India is concerned, Atmanirbharta is most important in defense technologies. Everybody in the world holds the cards next to their chest. Nobody shares technologies. You have to work for it. You have to get your intellectual property right. And if you see last 50 years, the aerospace is a sector where maximum action is. Same we saw in Op-Sindoor, in Ukraine, in West Asia. And that is where we have to get our act together very, very quickly. Now we know that we just heard that we've taken 30 years and we are LCA Mark 1 is still to come. We are 2 years behind schedule. AMCA is a different level. It's a stealth aircraft. Very few people in the world are making stealth aircraft. There are only 5 countries in the world which are making aero engines, and therefore there is a need for 2 things. One is put more money on the table for R&D, which is not happening. In India, we're spending only 0.6% of the GDP on R&D. The Chinese are spending 2.6%. The Americans spending 3.6% of the GDP on R&D. And therefore, put more money on R&D, whether it's the aero engines or whether it's fast-tracking stealth technologies and getting the AMCA going. But till then, 2 things. Partnerships. As the chair said, partnerships. We are partnering with the French. We are partnering with the Americans. We are partnering with the Russians on different systems. Joint ventures have worked well, whether it was, BrahMos and many other systems. We are now, Elbit, we are, with the Israelis, we are doing radars, missiles, a lot of projects are joint venture. Second is get the Indian private industry. We have been trying to handle the Indian private industry for last 20 years, but only in the last 4-5 years, the DAP 2026 will be released very shortly. The draft is already in public domain, and we are seeking...
and in the case of AMCA, if I may interject, HAL has been kind of put out of the loop.
Yes.
In favor of the private sector.
Absolutely. So the government and ADA, DRDO, they were very clear that we have to get some private... why? It's easier for private industry to take decisions, to get money, get funding, get technology. It's easier. And no country abroad wants to deal with for everything they have to walk the corridors of the Ministry of Defense, to take clearances from different people, because that's what you have to do in
sorry to be disruptive,
it's
about good. Disruptive technologies also. I'm being disruptive here, you'll pardon me. I move on to Lieutenant General Anil Kapoor, former DG Information Systems and EME. To you, the question is, recent conflicts show how drones, AI, cyber operations and logistics in the broadest possible sense can be decisive. What doctrine, capabilities and procurement should India prioritize to stay effective in both conventional and hybrid warfare?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. I think it's a privilege to be here this evening. We all are aware of what is happening in the Russia-Ukraine war or in the Middle East. But I'd like to put it in perspective through 4 lenses. The first lens is the connectivity lens. Decision support, I think, initially was a big problem, whether it was Russia or it was Ukraine. Because the electronic warfare systems did not allow communications to go through. We had the cyber systems which were live. And then came a phase when technology kicked in and we had better connectivity. There was multi-platform, multi-sensor data fusion, good visibility. Alternate communication systems, including Li-Fi, Starlinks, were given to some, brought by others, and I think connectivity got assured, and therefore we found a new rejuvenation in Russia-Ukraine war, which is 4 years plus today. Now let's look at the second lens, that is the lethality lens. We all know protection, mobility, and firepower have always been in warfare and are instruments of lethality. But here we found a new paradigm in terms of fakes, deep fakes, including the fact that one of the Russians in French was being picturized through a drone going to kill him, and he's pleading, leave me alone. And that was a kind of demoralization that was being brought into the battlefield. And then we had a major disinformation campaign going. So really lethality, information became a very important instrument there beyond others. We also saw unmanned autonomy, we saw loiter ammunitions, and we saw precision strikes happening as we went ahead. And then we had hypersonics and multi-platform, multi-sensor data fusion to get better visibility. But the crux of lethality was that with time, information decision cycles increased, and then they got compressed because of technology. So that is another learning through this lens. So this gets me to the third lens, which is technology. I think there is a huge need to have technology sovereignty with time. If we are 2047 Viksit Bharat, I think technology sovereignty has to stand tall as a pillar in Viksit Bharat. And I'm sure we are doing a lot about it. In this war, we saw technology being created at the edge. A lot of lethality. Look at what Israelis did with mobile instruments just going berserk and almost 1,000 key people getting killed. And you could do this with a lot of innovation. So really, innovation is the name of the game when it comes to technology. But most importantly, technology, I think, is very, very important in warfare today and in foreseeable future. The last lens is sustainability. Given the long-drawn campaigns that we see today, I think strategic resilience is very important, and for that, Atmanirbhar Bharat is very important. And since time is at a premium, I'll pick up some 5 pillars of the doctrine. The first is the whole of nation approach. I think there's no doubt each one of us sitting here are part of future warfare, and we must look at ourselves like that.
30 seconds, please.
Okay. The second is Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think it's a great call, great clarion call. I think we all need to participate and look at Gati Shakti from base to edge. The third is technology. I think technology sovereignty. A national R&D structure under ANRF is a yawning need. And since he's brought out about funding, I'll say RDI needs to be relooked at that. And the fourth pillar is agility. I think we need to have agile logistic systems, agile communication systems, and a smart soldier, a smart weapon system of the future, which is defined by 5 parameters.
Thank you.
Automation, autonomy, precision, positioning, and artificial intelligence.
Thank you very much, General. I move on to the next panelist. We get a private sector view, especially from the defense startup and innovation space. That's become very important today. We can't leave everything to the DPSUs, though they're doing very well, I must say. So Mr. Ankit Mehta, CEO, IdeaForge Technology, as AI speeds up detection to engagement, how will autonomous systems across air, land, sea, and cyberspace affect deterrence, escalation, and command responsibility in the next decade? Marshal Chopra, of course, mentioned something very reassuring, that the human being will always remain in the loop, and so we don't have to worry about autonomous weapons going rogue with AI. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think when we look at deterrence, I think we have to look at it from 2 perspectives. The first is the strategic deterrence. For example, the deterrence that nuclear weapons or nuclear systems brought in, where deterrence was created that you prevent people from misadventuring against your sovereignty. I think that is something which is very important. When we look at the age of AI, we have to investigate what are those areas and possible domains where strategic deterrence of this nature can be brought in. Are our adversaries planning in that direction? Are they going to look at areas where they can prevent us from doing things even before we start actually acting on it? And that's the power of AI, that AI can be weaponized to that extent because it is watching patterns from multimodal domains. Like we spoke about multi-sensor fusion at the edge, there is a multimodal data aggregation that is happening across board, and that data aggregation is going to create a pattern. And that pattern, if it indicates actions that we are going to take in the future, then deterrence will come from our adversaries taking advantage of that. Now, we can create such assets. We should also be wary of such assets getting created and deployed against us. That is one. Number two, tactical deterrence, which is, for example, if you look at what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine war, today soldiers are afraid of going out in the open because the
And first-person view drones are also
Exactly.
very effective in deterring soldiers.
Exactly. And the kill time is less than 10 minutes, which means that if you are in the open, you are going to get caught and you are going to get neutralized. That is a deterrence of its own. It's reduced the pace at which advancement can happen at the edge. And that's tactical deterrence, in my opinion, where it puts in the fear of getting exposed and getting neutralized well before things happen. I think that is, again, a very, very important vector of deterrence that we have to account for. And that's going to happen because many sensors are detecting you that fast. The presence is getting detected by sensors in the air. It's getting detected by sensors on the ground. Mobile phones are being used to detect drones because of the signature and sound signature. Thousands of drones on the field are being used to detect the sound signature and alert units that can counter the incoming attack. So a lot of deterrence is coming in from that direction. And overall, the entire chain of decision making, particularly in aerial attacks and in attacks from unmanned systems, because the distance from which such attacks can be launched is reducing significantly, means that, sir, I may beg to differ, but in certain scenarios, we may have to remove the man from the loop. Because if we do not, we will not be able to act fast enough. So it depends on where that attack is going to come from. And therefore, I imagine that robots
If you
will
remove man
become
from the
very
loop,
fast.
if you remove man from the loop, you'll have to teach your autonomous weapons some ethics and morality also.
No.
Where is the convergence?
No, so I think the first thing that will happen is robots against robots. Robots against assured signature of robots will be an autonomous loop, because that's how you will be able to neutralize the pace at which attack is going to happen.
But we don't want chivalry, bravery, and all these things we associate with the armed forces to be removed from the battlefield.
No, I think it will be a staged progress. It will happen. There is no denying in my mind that the pace at which a man in the loop can act will become the deterrence for our own security. So it will
Thank you.
happen, but progressively.
Thank you very much. Actually, I turn now to our last but not the least of our panelists, and that's Group Captain G. Aditya Kiran. He's a serving Air Force officer, so he obviously will speak only as much as he wants to. He's part of the directing staff at the DSSC in Wellington in Tamil Nadu, right? Yes. So over to you, Group Captain. How can India become self-reliant, Atmanirbhar, in combat drones and unmanned vehicles while keeping up with the adversaries' massive productions? In the case of China, it has huge production capabilities, and Pakistan may not have an equal capacity, but it does receive fairly generous assistance from China and countries like Turkey. So how do you think we can get to being Atmanirbhar in drones? The Prime Minister, by the way, has said that India should become a drone technology hub by 2030. And we are 4 years away from that. And drones will have dual use. Over to you.
So my understanding is the government has done a lot of good as far as its policies are supposed to do. You've got the drone rules coming out. You've got the Prime Minister giving out a very clear-cut vision. You've got the entire bureaucracy getting its act together. In the next 10 years in the defense, you're going to have $250 billion as capital expenditure, of which 75% is going to be indigenous sources. And that's a huge statement by itself. Secondly, more importantly, in 2018, the Indian Air Force came up with the Meher Baba Swarm Drone competition. It was conducted at the approximate budget of 16.5 crores. It has resulted in 20 plus companies getting more than 4,000 crores worth of orders. We've also seen a lot of brain gain happening rather than drain. More than 1,200 plus MTechs have not gone. They're employed by these various drone companies. Where the issue is of the gap is the government has done what it's supposed to do. But has the private industry actually stepped up? When I'm saying private industry, I'm not talking about the manufacturing, startups, etc. I'm talking about the private finance. Today, the cost of finance is so high that even if the government is giving orders, for the startup to actually raise funds and go through the entire working capital cycle and deliver is actually becoming very difficult.
But the TDF has been enhanced from 10 crores to 50 crores. So hopefully there'll be more offtake of that funding mechanism.
TDF is a development fund. What you need, what these startups need is startup capital. Today, the founder is spending more than 70 to 80% canvassing for financing. So what is required is, can we have banks actually step up and not ask for 140% of collateral to give a 100% BG. So if he wants 10 crores, the bank wants him to put down a collateral of 14 crores. That's not possible. So we need the PSUs and the private banks to actually step up. Second is we need the private equity to step in and start giving low-cost funds but take equity as collateral. And so if they are able to do one peculiar thing of drone companies and defense companies, working capital is not of 89 days which RBI stipulates. It requires 270 days.
Would all private companies, especially the smart ones who think who will succeed, be ready to give equity?
They will be. They have to. Because today, the biggest inflection point today is low-cost financing. So you need high-velocity capital, but which is low-cost. And that can actually change the entire gamut. China has been able to do that. And that's why they've been able to create DJIs. So unless and until the private equity funds actually step in, and actually utilize what the government is giving. 3,500 crores in emergency procurement orders. So that means velocity of capital is very fast.
Since time is, let me just say that, would I be right in saying that in order to be really self-reliant in combat drones and UAVs, etc., we will also have to have our own certification standards, testing, validation and such facilities?
That the government has already done. We've got the entire stack available. The Drone Federation of India actually has done a very good job in actually getting the Bharat stack up. So what now is required is indigenous private financing, the family offices coming up, taking stakes in the company, providing low-cost capital, and ensuring that cycle moves faster.
Well, I still have 19 seconds. So anyone wants to say something like 5 words? Okay. Air Marshal Chopra, would you give a shot, General, if you don't mind?
Okay, the time to act was yesterday. Let's get going. There is I'm a member of the advisor to Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers. We have got 500 startups, MSMEs with us. And we understand the pain that they are facing because the PSUs, the defense PSUs, are still not letting go. They are not wanting to handhold them. They are even DRDO is giving technologies to some of the smaller companies, but need to do it faster and more openly. Yes.
Thank you. Quick word from you.
If data is the new oil, technology is the new oil refinery, and today, whatever can be clearly defined can be precisely designed, developed, and deployed. I'll want all of you to join in this whole of nation approach. Thank you.
Dr. Mishra, one quick word from you.
Yeah, I would suggest that, as of now, the hottest military equipment is drone. So the government should ensure that there is a cluster or verticals for the different components of the drone and select it into the verticals. And there are few assemblers because what is happening now, dog is eating dog.
Thank you. Private sector view again. Ankit Mehta.
Sir, I think we are all extremely charged up and extremely present to what we need to do for both our country and for taking this technology forward. We are on the mission for what our Prime Minister wants us to do.
Group Captain, you can have the last shot.
I will only say, just like we had the digital UPI stack, perhaps MOD now needs to come up with the software stack for drones also.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. With those wise words, please give them a big hand. And that's all from me. For now, I thank the Times Group for giving us this opportunity to engage you and one another on a very important topic. Thank you very much.